welcome and thank you all for coming. I'm excited to present the work I've been collaborating on the past several months with Thomas Macaluso, Addiction's Actuality. Because the piece is fairly long, it's about 27 minutes in length, instead of playing the piece, then lecturing, then playing the piece again, we're just going to go right into the lecture at first, okay? Also, I do want to have a small little warning. This music and lecture will deal with topics that are fairly sensitive. They may be triggering for some people, so audience discretion is advised. So the format for this is we're going to talk about the conception of the piece, how it came to first be, and then I'm going to spend most of the time talking about the approach I took to creating this work, and I'm going to take it from three prongs. I'm going to talk about the narrative element of how I put it together as an entire tale, the musical material itself, the actual nuts and bolts of how I put it together, and the electronics, because I've done some work with electronics in the past, but I've only done pure electronics works, and this is my first electroacoustic piece. And then at the end we'll have a nice little summation about where the piece is going, things that are happening with it now, and so on. And for the conception of the piece, I'm actually going to do something slightly unorthodox, despite it being my own lecture recital. I'm going to have Thomas explain the conception of the piece, since this is a collaboration with him, and he's the one who approached me with the idea. So please welcome Thomas.
Hi everyone, my name is Tom Macaluso. I'm a doctoral candidate here at the university studying trombone performance, and as Nathan mentioned, this has been about a year and a half collaboration between the two of us. In spring 2017, when I was deciding on what to do my research on, I reflected on my own experiences, partially inspired by British composer Paul Rissman and James McConnell, who had actually formed an orchestra of people who are in recovery. I am also someone who's in recovery, and as a result of this, I reflected on my past life and also the people who have helped me throughout. So with that idea, I decided that I wanted to highlight other of my friends' stories. So what I did was last summer, so summer 2017, I met with 4 of my friends that volunteered to be a part of this. And consented to being interviewed in a recording studio. So each interview lasted about an hour, and I asked them about 15 questions about what their experience was like prior to using, during, and then working their way into recovery. After that, I submitted the sound clips to Nathan, and he had worked with that. So I can't thank Nathan enough for the work that he's done with this. It's been really quite a process throughout. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
So with that, having this be based around these interviews that Tom conducted, that played into a large part of my crafting the narrative, and that's how I had to conceive the piece. Because normally I'll have like an idea of a programmatic element or a melody or some little set of notes in my head that I'll put down and I'll start from there. But with this particular piece, I really couldn't do any of that until I had the interviews. So from the very beginning, we talked about the instrumentation while we went for this. Obviously, it's going to be for trombone because of Tom, and then piano, as you know, it's always good to put things with piano. And we also talked about having electronics because of the interview material. And for those, I used both. It's all pre-recorded sounds. It's all pre-recorded tracks, and that's for 2 reasons. One, because this is my first electroacoustic work and I wanted to keep it simple on myself, but I also wanted to keep it simple on the performer. I just wanted them to be able to hit play and go and not worry about anything else. So he's not playing into a mic and altering things, he's not doing any fancy pedal work or of any sort, it's just hit play, go. The things I used in this, I used Logic Pro 10 mostly to create the electronic parts, and with that I also used a Yeti USB mic. It looks like a kind of fancy radio stand mic. I used an AKM 320 MIDI controller. Fancy words for it. It's a small little keyboard I plug in. And I also used bottles, bottle caps, desks, metals, and a few other found things that you'll see later when we get to the electronics portion. So the approach. I am a big pre-planner. I always have tons of pre-planning materials for all of my pieces. This one was a little bit different because it kind of really twisted my process on this though. Like I mentioned, I normally have like a preconceived idea of what I want to do with the work, but since I had to wait for the interviews, I had to first go through all of them and decide that based. That's what made this whole narrative thing so important to this work. There's also the musical material approach. I did create an initial set of musical material that when I was creating the whole narrative, I was like, okay, I've got this set and I know which ways I can change it and manipulate it throughout the work. And then there was also the approach to electronics, and as I stated before, I wanted it to be just a track that can start and play. So the narrative. I'm going to go through the process that I did with listening to the clips. Tom said that he had them recorded in the summer. I was on a trip back home from Kansas, which those of you know, that's like a 10-ish hour drive. It's very boring. It's a lot of Iowa. And so I was like, okay, I've got 4 hours of interviews to listen to, and I wanted to listen to them just listening, not even capable of actually taking notes. I just wanted to listen to their stories and absorb them and hear them as they were without any sort of like, oh, I've got to have that clip, I've got to do this. So on that car ride home, I listened to just the interviews as they were. About a week later, I sat down with the interviews again after I'd had time to absorb them because they are incredibly powerful interviews. And I took just general notes on what the topics they were talking about, things that happened to them, tried to see if there was any kind of material that was like a unifying theme for them. And then I went through them a third time, again with another notebook. I've got somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20, 30 pages of notes from all of these recordings. And I went through with the specific intention of finally, on this third listen through, of going, okay, I'm going to take that clip, I'm going to take that clip. And I just wrote down these clips and where they were at in the interviews and whatnot. And then I imported them into Logic Pro. I went into the original files and said, okay, I need this little bit, chopped it out, put it in a new file. So I kind of made like a word bank for myself for the narrative. So building it. The questions that Tom asked them ended up kind of being in a chronological order, and because of the nature of these tales, I felt that was the best and easiest approach to this. So these do kind of go chronologically. They start with their life before addiction, what the factors that may have led them into it, the situations in their childhoods, and then it moves into their actual addictive phase. They relate stories of traumas and experiences they had while they were drinking, and then it moves into a phase of what their life is like after addiction, or when they're pursuing recovery or in recovery. I did minimal shuffling around of the actual audio clips. In other words, the audio clips as they appear in the piece are going to be pretty much in the chronological order that they appear in their storyline, as well as in the interviews. There are occasionally little tiny bits. Usually they're material that looped around and talked about the subject earlier anyway, so there's very minimal amounts of me taking one piece from something that happened much later and putting it earlier, or vice versa. There is just a hint of that here and there for artistic license. I'm not even sure at this point I could actually go back and point out which ones they are. The movement titles, which we'll get to on the next slide, reflect this chronology, and they're intentionally metaphorical and layered in their meaning. And you're going to see that here in just a second. And the initial set of generative material is also a guide to construction, because I wanted this set of material that we're going to talk about in a minute to reflect the journey of these people who have gone through addiction and recovery. So the movements and their meanings. This is a 5-movement work with a prologue and an epilogue. The prologue and epilogue are electronics only, and the main 5 movements are trombone, piano, and electronics. So as you can see, I've kind of taken some words that you can associate with drinking and whatnot, and they are not really necessarily meant to be a clever play on words so much as a metaphor as for what these people have gone through. So the prologue, Spirits Distilled, one of the questions Tom asked them was, could you describe addiction to someone who does not have addiction in 3 words? And so that's where that material, those 3 words, are just appear in the prologue as a way of kind of preparing us and setting us up for this journey that we're about to go on. Another question that he asked them at some point during the interview, the time frame was relevant, was what do they consider themselves? What label do they use? Do they call themselves an alcoholic? Do they say that they are recovered? Do they say that they are in recovery? There's some nuance in that. So I also put that statement in there as well to also kind of give a framework for what we've got. The first movement, Filling the Glass, narratively is all about their experiences in their earlier lives, their childhoods, their early teen years, maybe early adulthoods, their experiences, their feelings that led them into addiction or set them up to fall into it. The second movement, Volatile Cocktail, takes the material from the first movement, both narratively and musically, and twists it And this is a movement that all these mixtures have gone into this glass, and now you have this full cocktail, but it is obviously very volatile. This movement is very chaotic, and it relays a lot of the, I hesitate to say sordid, but they're the more, the darker tales of things that happened to them in the height of their addiction. There's a story of a woman in here who very vividly talks about how she literally fell off a cliff and suffered brain trauma from it. So those are the kinds of things that are narratively in Volatile Cocktail. This is just their entire experience of like, this is, pardon my French, this is when shit hit the fan. Moment of clarity is pretty self-explanatory. It's the moment that they found that, okay, I need to turn my life around in some way, or I'm going to possibly die, or in some cases, they were forced to turn their life around, or they would face legal consequences of some sort. So this is a much more pulled back, introspective movement. The clips from the people that are interviewed are actually much sparser throughout the movement, and they're very much more focused on just saying what their moment of clarity was instead of the randomness of the second movement. The fourth movement, Wrung Out, is about the process of entering into recovery and sobering up and all the thoughts and emotions and feelings that go into it. And it deals with the fact it's not easy to get into recovery, and it explores those emotions, the trials that they went through during that, the things that they kind of suffered through, like thinking, oh my God, I could really just use another drink right now, but what did I do to stop that? Or if I did that, what would be the consequence of that? So that's everything that's discussed in Wrung Out. And then after Last Call is when they are speaking about their lives post-addiction, where they're now in recovery or where they consider themselves recovered. And it's talking about the struggles that they still have all through their life, even if they feel like they've completely recovered and they never want to touch another drop of alcohol again. There may still be something in the background, and I've musically depicted that by actually having the material from the very first movement very lightly and sparsely intermixed underneath of it. So even though it's transformed into something new and the people have transformed into something new, there is still always that hint of, I need to be careful, I need to be focused, I need to have clarity. And then the epilogue, Sober Understanding. It took, Tom had a question in the interviews about what could you say to people who do not have addiction to try and help them further understand what it is like to have. So it's kind of their closing thoughts and summations on the topic. They state that in the epilogue, as well as finishing the piece with their statements of how long they have been sober. So this is part of my pre-planning stuff. I have tons of pre-planning sheets. What I did is, this is after in my notebook where I've got all the clips written down. Like I said, that was just a giant word bank. And then I was sifting through thinking, okay, which specific clips do I want and need? And so, like I said, for the prologue, I decided it needed to just focus on the 3 words and their status, their label, as they said in the interview. So I took those clips, I put them around. If you'll notice that, like, some of them have M, C, A, D. All those are just signifiers for which person is speaking. So M and C are both female, and A and D are male speakers. So that was more for me, just to make sure I'm like, okay, I know what the timbre of their voice is like, how this will play into something, or what that particular clip is, who's saying that clip. And then I take to another pre-planned sheet, which is where I normally start, if I didn't have all these specific narratives, where this is a very, very loose definition of what the form of the piece is. And it's clearly, like, I'm just making scribbles and doodles. There's some others that are a little bit more intricate than this that we'll look at later. But what I've done is I've put the words in the order that I want them to occur, the different audio clips. And then I just make a few little notes of, like, okay, I want this kind of electronic gesture to go here. Or as you'll see in later with the full ensemble, like, okay, I'm going to have the piano do something jittery here. Or I'm going to have the trombone follow, I don't know, this squiggly line. It's honestly very imprecise, but that's how I work. That's how my mind works with all music. I see things as gestures largely. Here's another set of a word bank for clips that I was using with Volatile Cocktail. I wanted to show this one because it's a little bit more organized. The prologue and epilogue I actually wrote after everything else. I did the first 5 movements and then did the prologue and epilogue later because they're electronic only, and I don't need somebody to practice that, but Tom needed the part. So these, you'll notice that the little check marks by them, that's all just for me to keep track of where I was, I've used this clip, I've used this clip. You'll see on the right side that I've got A's and B's. That's loosely, I had a very loose ABA-ish form for the second movement, and that's just to give me an idea like, okay, where do I want these clips to go? How am I building it? And then it results in this glorious mess. This is on a piece of 11 by 17 laid flat. So, yeah, my lessons are fun. So this is a full sketch of the second movement, the entire form of it. As you can see, I've got all of the audio clips. You can see them designated by the M, D, C, and A. And then underneath them, I've got they're just general directions for me, like, okay, I want to do this kind of thing with music here. I want to do this kind of gesture. I need this kind of material here. I made little notes on the electronics and nothing specific, but I did conceive of all of this together. It wasn't that I wrote something for piano and trombone and then layered the electronics on top. It's not what I did at all. It looks like it. That's not what I did. So yeah, there's lots of gestural things there. I'm going to briefly talk about extended techniques, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to demonstrate them. So the trombone has a multitude of different glissandi in this piece. I'm pretty big on having a glissandi be a stretched out kind of thing, having it start immediately on the note and then take all the way to the duration, whatever the end of that duration is. So sometimes they're quick, sometimes they're slow, but I really like just emphasizing that smear that only the trombone can really do. There's also some little bends at the ends of notes where he'll do just a quick little scoop up or scoop down, just another little variation on that. He also does some multiphonics. The way I've set them up for him is he will be playing one note while singing through the instruments to produce another, and it creates this kind of growling tone. And you hear mostly the note, but there's this weird kind of crackly distortion over it. So I've used that as a means of kind of tone painting throughout this work. In fact, the trombone is entirely used to accentuate what the clips that the interview participants are saying. And there's also flabby tone. So if every once in a while you think, God, Tom sounds he's really out of tune. He's not. I asked him to do that. They're just kind of these weird, warped, just saggy moments. That's the best way I can describe it. I know it's a very technical term. Piano, it's got regular pizzicato where you just got single notes that are plucked, but then I've also got a few moments where I just said grab a whole handful of strings and pull, so it creates a nice large thunderous effect. Scrapes, he'll just take his fingers and scrape along the insides of the strings. Dampening is a really neat, cool technique. He'll take one hand and place it on the strings in the piano, and then he'll play, and it kind of creates this very percussive effect where it doesn't necessarily ring, but the tone still comes out. Pedal pumps, every once in a while. Anyone who's played piano for any extended period of time, I'm pretty sure at some point has just rapidly pumped the pedal and seen like what the weird effects and just kind of ringing it does. So that's actually in the piece as well. It's kind of a heartbeat presence. And plastic casings. I originally had an idea to take some butter knives and throw them against the strings because I really wanted the metallic sound. That's not healthy and that's not advised by the, I can't remember the specific name of the piano board, but there's like a set of guidelines and they say no matter. Thank you on that, Vince. So I got out a couple old CD jewel cases of mine and said, here, let's throw these. They said plastic's okay. So you're going to see him at the beginning of the fourth movement is nothing but him just slamming plastic into the piano. So the actual music material. This is the set of material that I based the entire piece on. Now, it is 12 notes. It is the full chromatic. It is not serial. It is just happened to turn out that it was the full 12 notes of the chromatic. When I was creating it, I was much more focused on the intervallic relationships and how I wanted them to twist and turn and what things I could possibly do with that over a piece. And it just so happened to turn out that it ended up being the full chromatic, but it's not serial. So just so we don't all have audiate in our heads. And you'll notice I've got a little dashes there between the D and the F. I also, for my own benefit, kind of chopped it up into these three segments so that if I wanted to focus one segment on something melodic, I could have these three distinct segments. In fact, in the first movement, there is one passage that's solely just doing the D and E, representing, someone was talking about their stutter was a source of shame for them in their youth, and that was one of their triggers. And so we have that little motive just kind of moving back and forth. Over the course of the work, the generative material will be transforming, and it's paralleling the narrative journey that the participants went on. So this is just my little roadmap. This is the original generative material, and I just transpose it by hand for all 12 keys. And what I would do is I would sometimes be very capricious about when I wanted to change up my set. So sometimes I would go, like in this first set, I would go through the first 5 notes and I'd end on that C, and then I'd think, okay, I need to have a new set series, a new fresh set of pitches that still retain the intervallic relationships. So I'd go through those first 5 notes, end on that C, and then I would start on the transposition of the C row of it. So it's just a way for me to maintain the intervallic relationships, but also quickly move between and kind of freshen up the sets of notes that you're hearing. Volatile cocktail. Like I said, capricious calculations is very much how I operate. I've got the original set up in the corner, but then what I've done is I wanted the movement to be based around the original set, but I needed something that was a bit more chaotic with it. So what it is, I made 2 sets that are, one of them is moving, every motion it makes, it goes a half step too far, and then the other set is it goes a whole step too far. And I've also got the inversions of those 2 sets. So now I've got, instead of having 1 set of material, I've got 4 sets of material, and then you can see in parentheses there kind of in the middle, those are the missing notes. Because I've moved past where they normally were, it's no longer just a 12-note chromatic, it sometimes has repeated pitches or missing pitches. So I take those missing pitches and made another missing aggregate, and I'm like, cool, I've got another little set of material I can go and rely on and move around with. And I even took it a step further, and in the retrograde version of the step too far, the little arrows are me just saying I'm going to go 3 notes over, 3 notes over, 3 notes over, and that creates those 2 little ostinati lines I use at a couple points. So even though this is a very chaotic movement, I am still very controlling of my material, but I've got so much material here to work with, it still comes across as chaotic, which I think is a fairly good representation of being in the height of your addiction. You feel like you've got control, but you really don't. The third moment of clarity pairs back things. Like I said, I think earlier, the electronics kind of get out of the way a little bit, and it just focuses on the clips of the participants saying what their moment of clarity is. Musically, I take the original set, and harmonically, that is the harmonic basis for the entire movement, and it takes the entire movement to move through that series, and once it does, the movement ends. What I did for melodic content, however, is I took the retrograde inversion of the original. I took it both at the specific pitch, so starting out with a 4th, and I also took it at the opposite intervals, making it go to a 5th instead of a 4th, and just going on the opposite intervals. So if I had a 3rd, I went to a 6th. So I've got 2 sets of material there that I can now use over the course of this movement. And it also kind of, it's the retrograde inversion is also trying to represent that the world is turned upside down. They've had this moment of clarity. They see things have gone completely topsy-turvy, so why don't we just turn the musical material upside down too? And now I take that material from movement 3, and that's how I change it into movement 4. I do another retrograde and flipped inversion of it to kind of spice it up a little bit. And it's still kind of maintaining a lot of those intervallic relationships. Like you can see, it's got the minor 3rd there from the A to the F sharp, which is a very prevalent interval throughout this entire work. And I noticed that when I did these and I flipped them, that the first line ends on F and the second line ends on F. I was like, yes, I can put these together in one line. That works out so well. I love finding little moments that kind of come together like that serendipitously. Now, Wrung Out actually has the only set of additional material outside of this generative material. Everything else in this piece has been in some way derived from those first 12 notes and the various permutations I've done of them. But this material, there's a line in the 4th movement where someone describes that sobriety is a lot like wallpaper, and you're just staring at it and it's just boring into your brain. So this material is actually in the piano part just going chunk, 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 chunk for way too long, but I kept it that way because I wanted it that way. And so how I built it is it's actually just a series of seconds, arbitrarily, major or minor, didn't matter, just whatever, hey, that sounded cool on the piano. And then I just spread them out into the sevenths and ninths, and then I flip them around. So the first one is B flat, A flat, F, G, then comes to G, F, A flat, B flat. So it stretches out that material and gives it a little bit of development without really removing its purpose of being very wallpaper-like. After last call, one of the lines that the participants talked about was that they remember their old self, and they don't ever want to forget them, but they don't ever want to be them again, and they're afraid of that. So what I've done is I've got this new material where this top line. I've taken an inversion of those two strips from 4 and finally put them together. And now the series has gone from 12 notes to 21 notes, but still maintains a lot of the intervallic relationships, just in a completely new order. And what I've done, you see I've got a slur over the top half and the slur underneath the second half of it, and I was using those. Motives is a very strong word for me to use during this. It's more like, here's little cells I can use. And I just combined it out of like, okay, I'll take this much at the top and I'll put this much on the bottom, whatnot. And just, that way it's kind of mixing that old and the new a little bit. And it's not pictured here, but I mentioned earlier that at the end of this movement as well, the original set does come back, but it's very background, it's very sparse, it's very light, and it's just kind of meant to be an echo, a memory of what was before. So the electronics, as I mentioned before, they're pre-recorded sounds, they're just tracks. We've got the interviews. I use Logic Pro with the Yeti, the little MIDI controller, and the bottles, bottle caps, desks, and medals. And so the movements were written first with the tracks produced after. However, all of the electronic stuff was conceived of as I was writing out all the movements. So it wasn't in this weird vacuum. They weren't two separate things. I just didn't quite know exactly what the electronic sounds were going to quite be. But I had a method for planning that out, as you'll see here in a second. I plotted out in the pre-plan the general electronic patches needed. I tried to limit the number of patches because it's very easy with electronic music to go, oh my god, there's like 1,000 patches in here. I can use all of this. And you should really only use like 4 or 5. Mixture of practically performed elements recorded via microphone and finale produced passages. So what I did there is, you're going to, in a minute here, see some of the elements that I used that I just recorded with my microphone, some around the house items, some vocal stuff that I recorded, like crying sounds, hyperventilating, some manic stuff. And then finale produced passages. I'm not the greatest at keeping rhythm, so me trying to play on the MIDI keyboard was not working out too well. So I was like, let's just show that in finale and take that file down, and voila, it's in time. Yes. It works best for like a lot of like more complex rhythmic passages as well. Like there's the beginning of movement 5, everything is, it starts out in like 4/4, but everything in the electronic part is like dotted 8/16. No, wait, dotted 16th, dotted 16th, dotted 16th, dotted 16th, dotted 16th. That's a nightmare to try and play in 4/4. So I just let the computer do it for me. And like I said before, the tracks were specifically designed to be started and left alone for ease of performance, and there is a click track included with it that only the performers hear. So another pre-planned sheet that I had one of these for each of the movements, is the electronics. All these things in brackets are the different types of electronics I used. The names mean nothing. They are not things that are in Logic. Those are simply descriptors for me. Like, I wanted something that was echoey. I needed a warped vacillation kind of sound. I needed a tinkle shimmer. For those of you who know me, that's not really unusual language for me either. So I went through, and these are all the kinds of things. I was like, okay, these are things I can put through the MIDI for just pure electronic stuff, but these are also things I want to use to manipulate the voices, because a lot of times you'll hear repeated passages with the same clip being played over and over, but I always present it first as just a plain audio where it's just the voice, and then I will have it some way be manipulated and shifted into some sort of effect. So, also a fun little remnant, all this beat stuff, there's a lot going on in Volatile Cocktail, and my original intention was to have like this driving beat thing for it, and then as I made the electronic part, I was like, I forgot to put that in, and I don't need that at all. So all that beat stuff, that doesn't appear to work. This is another sheet for a much simpler one for a later movement, rung out before the movement. And again, like at the top, I use bottle, plastic, and metal, and I have one of those just as they were. They're not altered, so when you hear them in the movement, it is literally just me at my desk with 2 bottles going clink, clink, clink. And same thing, echo, I wanted the distortion, I wanted the synth. There is a piano, there's actually, I use the, I think it's the Yamaha grand piano patch in Logic Pro. So you'll hear points where Vince is playing something on a piano passage and he'll break away, but you'll still hear a piano playing. So I've actually made this divergent series of piano sounds. These are the tools I used. They've all been washed out and whatnot. I bought just the cheapest things possible because I'm personally not a beer drinker. I do drink some wine on occasion, but I don't go through a bottle of Riesling a night. And any of you who know my proclivity for Dr. Pepper, there's tons of Dr. Pepper bottles around my house, but that gives a nice hollow thing in contrast to all the other bottles. Those are pickle jars, by the way. And then this is the full setup I used, where we've got all the bottles, I've got my MacBook, and I've got, what I've got that set up as is on the MacBook are actually all the isolated clips from the interviews, and then I've, on my PC screen, my second monitor, I've got the actual project, the actual electronic track I'm producing. So whenever I needed a thing, I would go down to the MacBook and be like, okay, I need this clip, and whip, top it up to the top screen. I've got my, that's my manuscript, I've got a little art easel there to keep track of where I'm at in the score. The metal bowl with the ton of butter knives, I apparently have an obsession with butter knives. Anytime you hear a metallic clang in that, that is literally me holding my bowl, taking a wad of butter knives and going shunk. And then I also got the little MIDI keyboard there, and props to Mega Man for keeping me on task. This is also dangerous. I did break bottles during this, so thankfully my dog, who usually rests under the desk, was not there, because that would have been pretty disastrous. So this is kind of what I was looking at in Logic. I'm obviously not going to explain the specifics of Logic. I can't even really necessarily do that myself very well. But what I've got here up top, all of that was the stuff that I made in Finale, the trombone track, the piano track, and all the electronic stuff, and anything I needed, I would drag down to lower tracks. And you can see, like, I've got Adrian and Dean there, the two male speakers. Those are different clips of them speaking and other little things. And I've got them all color-coded so I can see where I'm actually at, what I'm doing. There's just another track to see kind of the madness I look at. Some of these audio clips are very small, which is a real pain to try and find in the files at times. But I've got like those three things there that you see 80, 80, 80. That's all Adrian speaking. That's him, the same clip 3 times, but put through 3 different patches and filters. So we've got 2 different kinds of echoes, and I think subtle percolation was, I think that was another type of echo thing. So here's an actual page of the manuscript that shows all of this in execution. So I've started out with a box piano figure where they're just playing the original set constantly for the next 4 bars. All while you've got the electronics there in the middle, starting with Dean going It was a wonderful clip. It's used a lot in the second movements. I had it start out plain, and I had it actually shift into moving into the echoed kind of patch that I decided on. Other things you can see here, I used my dark boom. Was another thing. So this really helps and shows and reinforces that, yes, I did think of this all together as trombone, piano, and electronics, not just I'm layering electronics on later. Here's another passage for later in that movement where this is actually just an electronic break where it's about 16 bars. I think it says 15, and I lied and I made it 16. And I just made gestural notations, not terribly unlike my pre-planning about how to actually, I want this clip to go to this clip to go to this clip to this clip, but I need this kind of electronic gesture under it. And then just one other one to kind of look at for comparison. This is from the very first part of Moment of Clarity. This is the beginning of the movement, where it's just starting with the synth speakers. A lot of times, the way this score is laid out is trombone on top, then piano, and then the bottom 2 stages are the electronic parts. So I started with just this synth. It's a synth D-flats with another D-flat coming in below, and then another one coming in below with the piano finally coming in with D-flats on its own. And Tom, this is a moment where he's going to do some multiphonics. I also asked him with the multiphonics not to do just, play one pitch, sing another. There's also these where he will he will play the pitch, start singing that same pitch, and then he will remove the playing and keep singing through the horn, so it creates this interesting melded effect. A little trick I also did for the multiphonics is before he has to ever play any multiphonic, I have him play the note that he's going to have to sing, and then have him move to the actual note he's going to play while he can continue singing that other note, or at least have that pitch in his head already. That's not anything specific for Tom. I would do that for any performer because I just want to make their lives easier. So, in summation, each movement as it was sent, as it was finished, so I finished the first movement and then I did the electronic track for it and then I sent it off to Tom. Then I worked on the second movement and I waited forever to do the second movement's electronic track, so I did 3, 4, and 5, did all their stuff, sent them, and then I sent 2 because 2 was just a nightmare, it was long. But everything was sent to him as it was finished, and he would give me feedback, we would work on things, and we'd go into rehearsals and whatnot, and we were tweaking this all the way up through January, and even now there's still like just really tiny little minute details, nothing like musical content's going to change, but like the actual like just like some notational things, just real small bits that we're going to have alter a little bit here and there. Tom and Vince, for his project, have already gone to Audio for the Arts and recorded this. They're going to make a full-fledged professional recording of this, which I thank you greatly for, guys. And Tom's currently mixing it, so that's where the piece is headed right now. And eventually, this summer, Tom and I are going to be giving a poster presentation at the 2018 International Trombone Festival is it in Iowa City? Sure, Iowa City. It's in Iowa. Overall, this piece, it really helped me refine my approach to crafting a composition and really thinking about multiple layers, not just thinking I'm going to stick with this material and hope it gives the effect of whatever programmatic element I want, or trying to solely go for a programmatic element and just making music try to fit that. It really made me examine like, okay, how can I build a coherent narrative over time? How can I use my musical material to reinforce that and reflect that? And as well, my own views on the topic of addiction and recovery have certainly been affected. I can't say I necessarily had views on it before, which might be a little part of the problem, actually. One of the things that Tom discussed with this work is he wanted to open up dialogue more around this topic. And so for my own benefit, like I've certainly learned to have much more empathy for someone who may be in recovery. And even if they're not someone in recovery, just having more empathy in general for someone, as well as kind of maybe examining some of my own habits that I am a little bit leery of that I won't go into here, but there are things I need to address in my life. So, with that, we're going to take a moment to shift this out of the way, and we'll have Tom and Vince play Addiction's Actuality. Thank you.